Some of our youth, they're like, why can't we be comfortable? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he saw a group of young men and he said, why are you asking for something which is impossible in this worldly life? They were like, Ya Rasulullah, what did we ask for? He's like, are you not asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for comfort? He said, yes. He said, that's not possible in this worldly life. You should embrace the hardships and use it as a stepping stone to get closer to Allah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين سيما الحجة بقية الله الأعظم روحي وأرواحنا له فداء واللعن دائم على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. As you know, and as the brother he mentioned, right now they are collecting donation for a campaign for the people in need in Lebanon because of what happened or what's going on right now in Lebanon. So HYC are collecting donations and they have a Lebanon fund where they're collecting the donations basically. So I can encourage everybody to participate in that fund, inshallah. Make sure that you donate to the people in need in Lebanon, even though that the people of Lebanon would never reach out and ask for anything because of the dignity of this people and because they also, mashallah, have the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their faith is so strong enough that they don't consider themselves to be in need of anything. But despite that, we should consider it to be our responsibility to help people. And according to the narration from Ahlul Bayt ﷺ, which beautifully states that a true believer is a person who helps his brother in need before he asks him his brother for help. In other words, you should consider it to be your responsibility to help people in need despite the fact that they're not asking directly or they don't reach out for your donations. So inshallah we can take up this collective responsibility and make sure that we help out our brothers and sisters in Lebanon, inshallah, for sacrificing basically everything for the sake of protecting the lives of the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam in different countries, because it's not only Lebanon that is being invaded. Lebanon is just on the front line basically, and they're defending the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam everywhere. So because they're embracing this sacrifice, inshallah we should consider it to be our support, our responsibility to support them behind the scenes, inshallah ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So yesterday we spoke about one of the important concepts that we have in Islam, which is called hidden illnesses, and why it's important to focus on spiritual illnesses. And we said, look, a wise person is a person who's aware of the spiritual illnesses that he carries around in his heart, and how dangerous it is that sins or the effects of sins which leads to spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden in the heart of a human being. Why we should consider to be our responsibility as human beings to first and foremost create this awareness or become aware of the hidden diseases that resides within our heart. Or else we become like a person who's not aware of a certain disease, and you know, just like Ines just probably told you, the worst kind of diseases are the diseases where you don't experience or feel the symptoms of those diseases. Why? Because they become more destructive. They're lethal basically. So imagine a person, but God forbid, he has cancer for example, but he doesn't see any symptoms of the disease that he's suffering from. Obviously that makes it even more destructive. Why? Because then he can't deal with it. He can't combat the cancer in the right time. So it becomes destructive and there's no chance for him to survive after that. And the same applies to spiritual illnesses as well. If a human being is not aware of the spiritual illnesses, we gave the example from an Islamic history. of a person who knew Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam better than the majority of people that lived in the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Yet he ended up on the wrong side on the battlefield, unfortunately. And that's what we get if we don't deal and combat the spiritual illnesses that we have in our heart, and if we don't focus on it. That's why we have a beautiful narration that speaks about hardships. When we look at hardships, when you look at trials, sufferings, and the fact that we are going to be examined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this worldly life through hardships, one of the wisdoms behind it is for us to discover the hidden flaws and illnesses that we have in our heart. That's the main philosophy behind it, because it's a discussion that is discussed amongst philosophers throughout history of philosophy. Why is it that we are facing so many suffering? We're seeing sufferings in this world. Is it compatible with divine justice? Yes, it is. Why? Because the main philosophy, one of the main philosophies behind Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting you on trial and accepting hardships for you, suffering, is because you get the ability to discover the spiritual illnesses that you have in your heart, which is explicitly mentioned in the Holy Quran. What is it? Allah, He says, وَلِيَبْتَلِيَ اللَّهُ مَا فِي صُدُورِكُمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He can test that which is in your chest. وَيُمَحِّسَ مَا فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. So He can purify your hearts. In other words, through sufferings and hardships, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first and foremost, He gives you the ability to discover the spiritual illnesses, and there afterwards, you get the possibility to purify your hearts as well. Why? Because through sufferings and through pressure, or being put under pressure, reveals our weaknesses as human beings. Sometimes we walk around thinking to ourselves, I'm a very patient person. I'm a very patient person, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts to test us with our in-laws. We thought we were patient individuals. Suddenly we become parents, for example. And then your patience is tested. In other words, the fact that you were impatient was hidden within you. Now when you have children, you're being tested. In other words, you discovered the hidden illnesses that was hiding in your heart. And we said the reason why some of the illnesses, spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden in the heart and soul of a human being is because we're complex as human beings. In other words, there's different layers to our existence. Hence, it's easy for some of the spiritual diseases and illnesses to remain hidden in our soul and hearts. But when we're put under pressure, no. It reveals our weaknesses. Why? You see in the Holy Quran, there's a beautiful verse. We normally recite it when somebody passes away. What is it? إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. You see, in Arabic, when you say asaba, it means that something hits its target. In other words, it was intended for that certain thing that it hit. When we say, for example, asaba, when we speak about an arrow that hits its target, we say asaba when it hits its target, not when it's shot or fired. No. When it hits its target, we say asaba. إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ. In other words, this calamity that you're facing right now was intended for you. Don't try to flee from it. Embrace it. Use it as a stepping stone to get familiar with the spiritual illnesses that resides within your heart. Because that was the purpose of you facing these sufferings in life. Some of our youth are like, why can't we be comfortable? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he saw a group of young men, and he said, why are you asking for something which is impossible in this worldly life? They were like, Ya Rasulullah, what did we ask for? He's like, are you not asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for comfort? Say, yes. He said, that's not possible in this worldly life. You should embrace the hardships and use it as a stepping stone to get closer to Allah. Because the continuation of the verse is what? قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. So when they face calamities that were intended for them, not that they face calamities or go through sufferings because of something else. No, Allah says this was intended for you. This was designed just for you, this suffering and this calamity that you're facing. قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. To Allah we belong and to Him we return. In other words, they embrace it and utilize the calamity to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They seek proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't try to escape it and run away from it. They don't try to run away from it. And that's why you see, it's very important that we teach our children and our youth that look, when you're facing hardships, make sure to embrace the hardships. Why? May God forbid there are spiritual illnesses that resides within your heart, and because you fled the hardships, you didn't want to embrace it, you sought towards comfort instead of hardships, embracing the hardships, now you're going to face the consequences of that. And what is that? That spiritual illness would remain hidden in your heart until it becomes more destructive. And when you're exposed to that, Allahu Alam, whether you're going to survive or not, then there's no guarantee that you will survive, because now it's grown so strong and so lethal that when it's exposed, may God forbid that you're not going to survive then. You're not going to survive. So we should make sure always to embrace sufferings. Use sufferings in our own benefit. That's the main philosophy behind sufferings and hardship. حَتَّى يَتَضَرَّعُونَ Allah, He says in the Holy Quran, we're putting them through all these hardships, حَتَّى يَتَضَرَّعُونَ, so they become humble. So they seek towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they get the ability to become familiar and discover the hidden diseases and illnesses that was residing within their hearts. Yesterday we spoke about a narration. I think some people might have misunderstood it. We said that sometimes that the fact that a spiritual disease remains hidden in the heart of a human being is worse than committing a sin to discover that hidden disease. Some people, they understood it as if I was saying that, look, go out, commit sins so you can discover your hidden diseases and spiritual illnesses. No, of course not. And the Prophet ﷺ, he even explained that to Abu Dhar as well in the narration. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Listen to the narration. Ya Abu Dhar, inna al-abda liyudniba dhanb fayadkhulu bihi al-jannah. A person, he commits a sin, and through that sin that he committed, he will enter paradise. Abu Dhar, he was surprised just like you and I, because he understood it as if because the fact that he was disobedient, then he would enter paradise because he was disobedient. That doesn't make sense. We are always told that you need to be obedient to Allah in order for you to enter paradise, right? So Abu Dhar, he asked the Messenger of Allah, وَكَيْفَ ذَلِكَ? How is that even possible? That a person commits a sin, and because of that sin, he will enter paradise. The Prophet ﷺ, he states, يَكُونُ ذَلِكَ الذَّنْبِ نَسَبَ عَيْنَيْهِ. That sin that he committed will remain before his eyes all the time. He constantly sees his shortcomings, his faults. In other words, he discovered his hidden illnesses. تَائِبًا مِنْ, he repents from it. فَرًّا إِلَى اللَّهِ, fleeing towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. حَتَّى يَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةِ. So he committed that one sin until he enters paradise. So he committed that one sin. He sees it before his eyes all the time. That one sin that he committed. And then he starts to discover his hidden illnesses. He seeks repentance from it. Fleeing towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until he enters paradise. That it's not the sin, it's the way he dealt with the sin. And how he used it in his benefit and utilized it to what? To discover his own hidden illnesses as a human being. And respected brothers and sisters, it's not only when it comes to hardships and sufferings that we should utilize in order to get closer to Allah. Even when it comes to blessings as well. Even when it comes to blessings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. There will be question on that day about the blessings as well. Imam Rida alayhi salam, he was sitting in a gathering. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam Rida alayhi salam, he was sitting in a gathering of scholars, and they asked him, is it true that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will hold people accountable for the blessings they were blessed with in this worldly life? He said no. They were surprised. They were like, what are you talking about? It's explicitly mentioned in the Holy Quran that you will be questioned about the different blessings you were blessed with in this worldly life. He said, how do you understand this verse? It's like, that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to question us about all the sustenance He gave us, food, house, family, children, I don't know, you mention it. Imam Rida, he said no. It's one specific blessing that you're going to be questioned about on the day of judgment. And not anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to hold you accountable for these superficial pleasures and blessings that He gave you. No, He's not going to hold you accountable for that. But there's one specific thing that He's going to definitely hold you accountable for. And you know what that is? حُبُّنَا أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ. And that is the love and affection you have for Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. If there's a blessing that we would be questioned about without any doubt, that is the hope of Ahlul Bayt. Because if a person, he claims a title, he claims to be a follower of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, and it doesn't show in his behavior, he would definitely be questioned about it. He's not going to question you about your food and some water and some juice and, I don't know, a car and a house. That's not even important. That was a blessing that he gave even the kuffar, even the disbelievers. He gave every human being these things. Even animals, they have these things. But the hope of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam is something special. And that is what we be questioned about. We're going to be held accountable for it 100%. There's no doubt about it. So nobody can claim that, look, I love Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Yeah, I have affection for Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. When it comes to my practice and my behavior, no, I don't need to follow their teaching. لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ قَالَ بِلِسَانِهِ وَخَالَفَنَا فِي أَعْمَالِنَا وَآثَارِنَا. He's not amongst our followers, the person who claims a title. But when it comes to our actions, he contradicts us. He goes against our teachings in his behavior. Through his behavior and his lifestyle, he's a walking paradox, this person. On one hand, he claims that he's a follower of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, but on the other, he lives like the enemies of Ahlul Bayt. He speaks, walks, talks, eats, everything just like the enemies of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. But he claims that, no, I have love and affection for Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So no, that's exactly what you will be held accountable for. That is exactly what you're going to be questioned about. This is the na'im which is mentioned in the Holy Quran. So not only hardships, but also blessings in this worldly life, respected brothers and sisters. Make sure to utilize it in order for you to discover your hidden flaws. Because sometimes Allah, He blesses us with things, and through those blessings, we are tested. We are tested. Just like we see around the world today, look how beautifully they pass the test and the exam. Some of these individuals, they lose their children with a smile on their face. They say, we know for sure that they're in a better place right now. This is a test for them. Imagine having so much love and affection for your children. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was told to slaughter his child, Allah didn't even allow it. And it was difficult for a prophet. Look at the individuals today with a smile on their face. With a smile on their face, they embrace the hardships because they know that, no, because it was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing is wasted. Because it was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing is lost. Nothing goes in vain when it's sacrificed for the sake of Allah. Nothing. With a smile on their face, their children are sacrificed beautifully. Pure. Look at the mentality. Look at the way they utilize the hardships to seek proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the ideal state of a mu'min and a believer. Because sometimes we're tested. Sometimes we're tested with our children. Sometimes we're tested with our spouse, for example. Sometimes we're tested with our parents, our in-laws, the broader community, for example. Our interaction with the community. We're tested with these things. It's a test. Why? To give us the ability so we can discover our spiritual illnesses. So why does spiritual illnesses remain hidden in the heart of believers? I'm going to mention 4 different reasons to it tonight. And then after that, I'm going to mention 4 different ways how to combat or how to discover and have the ability to discover the spiritual diseases and illnesses that we carry around in our hearts. The first one, respected brothers and sisters, the reason why a lot of our spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden is because of our attachments. Normally human beings, they love themselves, and that's not a bad thing. Self-love in an Islamic context or in an Islamic perspective is not a bad thing if it's cultivated the right way. Self-love is not necessarily a bad thing, true self-love. When you're only willing to accept that for yourself, which is in your own benefit. In other words, you're not satisfied with anything except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is a positive form of self-love. But the self-love I'm speaking of here, that's one of the reasons why some of the spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden. Because we love ourselves as human beings, we have a tendency to convince ourselves that, look, because I want to be a good person, yes, I have a desire and attachment to become a good person, I start to convince myself, you actually reached that. You are a good person. In other words, I start to overlook some of the spiritual diseases that I carry around. I start to overlook some of the sins and mistakes and the shortcomings that I have as a human being. Why? Because the nafs of every human being, one of the main functions of the ego of a human being, you know what that is? That is to make sure that your perception and what you have an attachment to are aligned with each other. So if you committed a sin, for example, they'll be like, overlook that sin, that's not that important. And if you do a good deed, it'll be like, amplify it, make it big. Look, you saved the world, right? You brought some tea for a majlis, for example. Now you saved the world, mashallah. You're going to enter paradise for sure. But the thousands of sins that we commit, no, nothing. Nothing. It overlooks it. Why? Because we love ourselves. We have a desire to become good human beings. And then we repeat a lie so often that it becomes the truth. And we start to believe it. Now we're convinced that we're good people. Therefore, some of the spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden in our hearts. Then we can't discover them. Why? Because of our attachment. The second reason, our fear to become hopeless. One of the reasons for us not accepting the symptoms that we see for spiritual illnesses is because we become hopeless. It's like a person who sees all the symptoms of a certain disease, but he's like, no, I'm good, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. Why? Because he's afraid that if he goes to the doctor will tell him, look, you have this disease, he will become hopeless. His life will fall apart, his world will fall apart. So he acts like it's non-existent. And that's one of the main reasons why our spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden. We're in denial basically. Because of what? We're scared not to become hopeless. We're scared. And that's one of the schemes of shaitan, to make human beings hopeless. No, be brave. Make sure to combat this spiritual illness. Have the ability to discover it. But at the same time, don't become hopeless. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He told just the fact that you understand it, that's 50% of dealing with the issue. You've gone halfway. Why? Because if you don't know of a spiritual illness, how are you supposed to fix it? How are you supposed to combat it? Just the fact you have the knowledge now gives you the ability to deal with it. In a logical way, in a rational way. In contrary to a person who doesn't even understand that he carries around different spiritual illnesses. He doesn't even know of it. Why? He starts to deny. He's in denial. Third reason, because they constantly are with us. So we adapt to the situation. Just like, for example, if I have back pain, yeah, it's constantly with me. So I adapt to the situation as if it's not even existent anymore. I just adapt to the situation because it's constantly with me. The fourth and the last reason, and that is something we should discuss much more, and that is the culture that exists within our communities. Sometimes in order for me not to be criticized and to be free of the criticism and other people raising criticism against me, I don't criticize other people. We create this culture in our community that, look, stay silent or else you're going to be criticized yourself. As if it's a bad thing to criticize your brother or sister in Islam. While Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salatu was-salam, he said, the best of my brothers is a brother who gives me my own shortcoming. Who gives me my shortcoming. But we created a community where everybody knows something. Everybody knows the shortcomings and the mistakes and faults of each other. So a person, he knows that. He knows, oh, if I mention something, if I raise any critique against a certain individual or institution, they know certain things about me, they will do the same thing and it just go back and forth. And it becomes a fight. So I'm not gonna walk into a fight. I'm not gonna start a fight if I can't finish it. Therefore, I'm not gonna raise any criticism. No, create a culture where it's okay that you give nasiha, sincere advice to your brother in Islam. Create a culture where it's okay. So how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the fact that a lot of these spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden? How can we combat it? How can we obtain the ability to discover our spiritual illnesses? First and foremost, understand that, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave you the ability to do so. That's the first thing. Don't be scared of what we mentioned yesterday, that look, a human being is a universe, you have to discover the different rooms and the different aspects of your soul and all that. Don't be scared about these things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also states in the Holy Quran, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. We inspired the soul of its wickedness and its righteousness. In other words, the soul knows about its own state, knows about the wickedness of its own state. It knows about these things. It's not like, no, you only know about the righteous deeds and therefore you can't discover the spiritual illnesses. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired the soul to have this kind of insight about itself. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا. Human beings are witness against themselves. وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَاذِيرًا. Sorry. He said, human beings, they are witness against us. They have insight. They know. They use as a witness against themselves and their own souls on the day of judgment, even though that they bring forward excuses. Don't be fooled by the excuses. Human beings, they have this potential that they can actually discover the spiritual illnesses that they carry around in their hearts. So what is the first method, respected brothers and sisters, to discover or have the ability to discover the spiritual illnesses that you carry around? That is the concept which is neglected, unfortunately, especially in this modern day society, where we only feed our short-term memory and looking for short-term pleasures, and we want quick results with everything. That is the concept which is called tafakkur in Arabic and contemplation in English. Tafakkur is one of the most neglected concepts in modern society. Why? Because we live in a fast-paced world, basically. We're only feeding short-term, the only thing that we're looking for, chasing short-term pleasures all the time. You see all these social media apps, reels, yeah? If they're over 30 minutes, 30 seconds, nobody's going to watch them. They're just going to skip, go through like thousands of videos a day. This creates a mentality where it's difficult for a person to concentrate and contemplate. While contemplation is one of the most effective tools for you to become familiar and discover the spiritual illnesses that you carry around. In a beautiful narration from Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, Al-fikr yufidu al-hikmah. Allah salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He said, Al-fikr yufidu al-hikmah. Contemplation leads to wisdom. Yesterday, we mentioned, according to Imam Ali alayhi salam, who is a wise person? A person who knows about his own shortcomings and faults. So put the two narrations together, yeah, and you get the results. In other words, contemplation would lead you to become familiar with your own shortcomings and your faults. Why? Because you become a wise person. Yufidul hikmah. Yufidul hikmah. Contemplation. That's one of the best and most effective methods. Allama Tabatabai rahmatullah alayhi, this amazing scholar, he used to tell his students always to have these thought exercises. He said, put an object in front of you, an apple for example. Only think about that object for 3 minutes, put a timer on, and the only thing you think about is that apple. The color of it, the shape of it, the taste of it, yeah? As soon as you catch yourself thinking about other things, come back to that apple. He said, strengthen your control over your own thoughts. Thought exercises are very important for you to keep control, keep focused, keep concentrated. And that's one of the beautiful aspects of the concept which is called contemplation. Why? Because contemplation sometimes leads you to different results from what you thought was a cause for something. Let me give you an example. There was a brother, he once came to me. He said, Sheikh, now I want to buy a specific house. I was like, what is it that you're looking for? A roof above your head? You just want a roof above your head, right? He said, yes. He said, what do you want from a house? He said, comfort. I was like, how do you obtain comfort? He said, by buying something which gives me or provides me with tranquility. I was like, fine. What if if I told you it's possible for you to obtain tranquility without buying a house? Would you choose another method that is much cheaper than going out to buy a house because you're looking for tranquility? He said, of course I would. It's like, have you seen there's certain individuals that out there in the world that they have palaces, but yet they have no tranquility in their lives. So just because you have a nice house doesn't mean that you're going to have tranquility in your life. In other words, a house is not the cause for tranquility. You need to look for its source, another place, not in a house, not in a palace. He said, you're right, Shaykhna, you're right. Then we just kept going back and forth, discussing, look, contemplation, what it does. And then he said, so what should I do then? What should I do? I told him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave you the Solution. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. It's only through the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the hearts will find comfort, ease and tranquility. It's simple. You can live in a palace. If you don't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no tranquility. You can live without a roof above your head, like the innocent people of Lebanon and Palestine today, and you will have tranquility. You will have tranquility. Why? Because they have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I told him, look how he benefited from contemplation, the concept of contemplation. He thought that, let me go buy a house. Yeah? Imagine spending, I don't know, £1 million for what? To buy something that's not going to provide you with that which you bought it for. That's a waste of money. You spent £1 million to buy a house to get tranquility, and you didn't get the tranquility. That's a waste of money. That's a waste of resources. Don't do that. Contemplate. Contemplate. And you will reach different results from that which you thought was a cause of something. And that's the beautiful positive effects of contemplation. In a beautiful narration, it is stated, أَحَبُّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِلَى اللَّهِ مَنْ نَسَبَ نَفْسَهُ فِي طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ. The most beloved believers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the people that dedicates themselves to be obedient to Allah. And then he continues, وَالنَّسَحَ لِأُمَّةِ نَبِيِّهِ. And they give sincere advice to the nation of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَتَفَكَّرَ فِي عُيُوبِهِ. And they contemplate about their own faults, their shortcomings. If we utilize a concept like tafakkur, like contemplation, to think about our spiritual illnesses, we can deal with them. Why? First and foremost, we can discover them, and then afterwards we can combat them. But use the concept of tafakkur. Sometimes you see throughout the whole day, there's not even a moment where we sit for ourselves just to think. And when we do, it's all about negative thoughts. Oh, I don't have money enough, my children said this, my wife said that, my parents did this, my in-laws did that. Try to put aside all the negative thoughts for a moment, yeah? And be a bit positive, be a bit productive when it comes to a concept like contemplation. That's why Allama Tabatabai rahmatullah alayhi, he gave that thought exercise to his students. He said, because you should be in control over your thoughts. Don't be like a highway, anybody who just passes on and you just, like, they're just gonna pass on, like, you're not in control over your own thoughts. You don't decide who passes by and who drives away and who stops and who does not. No. He said, don't be like that. Be in control, be superior to your own thoughts. Exercise thought exercises. That was the first one, contemplation. Second, another method is to change our lifestyle when it comes to accepting criticism. As we mentioned, unfortunately, in a lot of communities, alhamdulillah, I don't feel like it's an issue in this community. MashaAllah, the brothers I've met so far, alhamdulillah, have been very open to criticism. But in general terms, whether it's within the family or in the community, make sure that you're open to criticism. Be a bit open. Maybe there's some truth in what they're telling you. Don't be like, no, it's impossible, no, this, that. Then all the spiritual illnesses will remain hidden. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, in the sermon of the pious, in the sermon of the pious Khutbatul Muttaqeen, he gives the most beautiful definition of a pious person. Beautiful. What is it that he says? لا يرضون من أعمالهم القليل. They're not satisfied and pleased with the small deeds. ولا يستكثرون الكثير. And they don't consider the many deeds to be abundant. فهم لأنفسهم متهمون. They hold themselves accountable all the time. لأنفسهم متهمون. Not other people, themselves. ومن أعمالهم مشفقون. And they're worried about their many actions and their deeds. May God forbid I didn't have any sincere intentions behind the many deeds that I committed. وَإِذَا زُكِّيَ أَحَدٌ مِّنْهُمْ خَافَ مِمَّا يُقَالُ لَهُ. And when somebody praises that person, the pious person, he's afraid of that which is he's being praised of. In other words, he's scared. He said, why did this person praise me? May God forbid it's something which is not true and I'm going to be held accountable for it. I don't want that. فَيَقُولُ. And then he says, أَنَا أَعْلَمُ بِنَفْسِي مِنْ غَيْرِهِ. Every time somebody praises him, He's scared, and then he says, I know myself better than others. And then he continues, وَرَبِّي أَعْلَمُ بِي مِنِّي بِنَفْسِي. And my Lord knows me better than I know myself. And then he continues this beautiful dua. Allama Tabatabai rahmatullah alayhi. He said, this is a dua from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. You should recite it every time somebody praises you. What is it? Allahumma la tu'akhidni bima yaqulun. Oh Allah, do not hold me accountable for what they say about me. Waj'alni afdala mimma yadunnun. And make me better of that which they think of me. وَاغْفِرْ لِي مَا لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. And forgive me for that which they don't know of. Because there's a lot of things that I know of which they don't. This is the definition of a pious person. Now you're telling me that we should have a community where people are not willing to accept criticism, or we shouldn't be able to criticize each other? When the definition of a pious person is that he's constantly holding himself accountable. He doesn't consider his many deeds to be abundant. He's not satisfied with his deeds. And when somebody praises him, he turns around and be like, oh Allah, don't hold me accountable for what they say about me. Do not hold me accountable. Let alone if somebody criticizes him, he's going to accept that. He's going to embrace it. Just like Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, he said, the best of my brothers is a person who gives me my own shortcomings and faults. This is the best of my brothers. The person who does that. So that was the second one. Third one, make sure that you don't scout for the flaws and shortcomings of other people. Sometimes when it comes to the shortcomings of others, we scrutinize their shortcomings to an extent that we completely forget about our own. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, in a beautiful narration, Allah salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He says, Tuba liman shaghalahu aybuhu an uyub nas. Successful is the one who's so occupied with his own shortcomings and faults that he doesn't keep himself occupied with the shortcomings and faults of others. This is a successful person. Whether it's within the community or within the family, between husband and wife, doesn't make a difference. This should be the general principle. Be a hunter for mistakes and shortcomings, but for your own one. Your own, not other people's. Don't scout for shortcomings and faults in others, scout it within your own soul. Because the spiritual illnesses that we carry around in our hearts, they're definitely there. We just need to discover them. The fourth and last one, lack of self-accountability. That's one of the main reasons why a lot of spiritual illnesses, they remain hidden as well. And Imam Khani alayhi salam, in a beautiful narration, what is it that he says? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He said, Laysa minna man lam yuhasib nafsahu fi kulli yawm. He's not amongst our followers the person who doesn't hold himself accountable every single day. Every single day. This is a believer. This is a follower of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, a person who keeps himself accountable for his actions every single day. Just a couple of moments before you go to sleep, try to count the different deeds that you've done. If you committed sins, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. If you did good deeds, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you the success and tawfiq to do even more. And praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your good deeds. Don't ascribe them to yourself as if you've done a good deed. No. Thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving you the tawfiq, that He was the one putting this money in your pocket, not because you spent up some money that you had yourself or was from yourself. No. This is the most beautiful thing that we can do. But the lack of self-accountability, you know what it's like? It's like a captain who's on a ship. He just lets go of the wheel and he starts to blame the waves and the crew members and everybody else, the weather, the wind. You were the one letting go of the wheel. You were the one supposed to make sure to direct the ship or guide the ship towards its destination. You just let go of the wheel and then you start blaming everybody else. And that's exactly what you get if there's no self-accountability. That's exactly what you get. Hence, Imam Khani alayhi salam, he says, he's not amongst our followers. If there's no self-accountability, he's not amongst our followers. And if you want to see the effects of people not having self-accountability, let's go to the city of Medina for a second. let's go to the city of Medina. And you see thousands of people who gave bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Now, they're completely as if they forgot everything. Overnight, they forgot everything. The fact that they gave bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the fact that they told Fatimah al-Zahra salamun alayha they will support her. And after what happened in the house of Fatima, after they came to forcefully take Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam towards the masjid, according to a narration, it is stated that Fatimah al-Zahra salamun alayha, for a whole month she couldn't get up from her bed. For a whole month she couldn't get up for her bed. According to the narration states, Asma says, she washed her body and then said, Fidda, don't do any work right now. Suddenly Asma, she saw Fatima al-Zahra, she got up and she washed herself and she felt happy. I saw that she seemed much better and I thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ali's prayers was heard. Ali's prayers was answered. And her condition had improved. The narration continues. Fatima al-Zahra salamun alayha, she told Asma, I'll sweep the house myself. Bring my children to me one by one. First, I brought Zainab and saw her begin to wash her head and body. Then I brought Hassan and Hussein. And with her weak hands, she washed their bodies as well. Asma says that none of them cried. And even though their mother had been unable to do anything for them in a month, for a whole month, none of them cried. Asma continues, she said, she washed each of her children's body, combed their hair and said to Fidda, since I won't be around for a few days and things might change, light the oven. Let me cook the last meal for my children. I saw her slowly move over to the oven. She lit with fire and with her broken hand she baked bread. She placed the loaves aside and her housework was done. She said, take my Zainab to my cousin's house. She told the boys, go to your father. Lay my bed in the middle of the room. When you go home tonight, she told me, for a moment, place your right hand under your cheek, lie down for a bit. Salama narrates, she put her hand under her cheek. You could tell her face was in pain. They saw her rest her head on her hand, and then she fell silent. Salama broke up, oh mother. I called out to her, oh beloved of Allah, oh light of the Prophet's eyes, Fatima. I lifted the cover and I saw she was asleep. This is the worst part of the narration. Fidda, she hastened towards the masjid. Salmani narrates that. He said, I was in the entrance of the mosque and suddenly became crowded. I heard the sound of crying. I stood up to see what was happening. I saw that Fidda was crying out loudly. Hassan and Hussein had come. When Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he noticed, he stood up and approached them. He said, what's going on? They replied, Ya Amir, if you want to see Fatima alive, you need to come quickly. As soon as he heard this, he looked at Hassan and Hussein. And there's a narration that says that from that shock, he fell to the ground. This is a Fatil Khaybar. He fell down on his face. There was a person that lifted the gate of Khaybar. The narration says that they saw him calling out repeatedly, who is there to mourn for me and ease this sorrow? From the mosque to the house is just a small distance. It's just a short distance. But several times his cloak got around his legs and he fell to the ground. But Ali, when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he reached Fatima, he said, Ya Ali, get up, I'm Ali. The body moved slightly. The sound of Fatima with Ali is sweet, and the sound of Ali with Zahra is sweet. She passed away and then returned 3 times. 3 times she passed away and then returned. And then when Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he started to shed tears, Fatima Zahra, she opened her eyes and she saw Ali was crying, so she shed tears herself. فَبَكَى وَبَكَى. Then she said, Ya Amir, Ya Ali, I heard from my father, whoever recites the Quran at the bedside of a dying person, it makes it easier for them to pass away. As if she brought it up as an excuse just to hear the beautiful recitation of Ali ibn Abi Talib at the last moment of her life. Let me hear your beautiful recitation just for a last moment. Recite the Quran for me. As soon as Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam began to recite, she slowly closed her eyes. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.